Sometimes how you come across somebody once in a while you shouldn't have messed with. That's me.
I am not an African American.
You're an Oreo cookie, white in the inside and black on the outside.
I don't have an afro, I have an Amerifro.
Talking that idiotic stuff you talk about, I will slap you.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Black as the ace of spades, but 100% American.
Heard around the world by everybody and their mama. The Jesse Lee Peterson Radio Show.
Uniting the races with truth instead of dividing them with lies. We're also rebuilding the family by rebuilding the man. Thank you so much for being with me. Welcome to the show. I have with me Pastor, well, ex-pastor now, Jerry DeWitt. Jerry DeWitt. He began his ministry at the age of 17, and after 25 years of preaching and being pastor at 2 different churches, he became an atheist. Talking about losing my religion, he became an atheist, and he's now or is living in Louisiana. And I want to talk to him about his brand new book, Hope After Faith, an ex-pastor's journey from belief to atheism. Jerry, good morning, sir, and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Reverend. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
It's good to have you on. You can call me Jesse.
Thank you, Jesse.
I absolutely appreciate it. Very, very interesting book and very interesting life. And I want to try to get, for me and my audience, listening audience, I want to get a clear picture, a clear understanding of what happened to you and why it happened to you. You recall, according to this report, at the age of 17. That true?
That's correct. I got saved at Jimmy Swaggart's church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
That's amazing. And why did you think that? What made you think that you were called at that time?
You know, I was raised in and around the apostolic Pentecostal faith, the oneness Pentecostal faith. Mm-hmm. So actually getting saved at Jimmy Swaggart's church was kind of like crossing the theological fence. I was over there playing with the Trinitarians, you know, even though my family was oneness.
Right.
And but, you know, I immediately sensed the vision. When I walked into Swaggart's church and there was the mural of all the continents up on the wall, and I heard the messages, I just immediately fell in love and sensed the power and need of the vision to evangelize the world. Almost, you know, it's probably fair to say that I saw the vision even before I felt like I had gotten saved. And then immediately after my salvation experience, there was hardly a night, and you'll have to forgive me, I'll ramble on, so stop me whenever you want me to stop.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. But I, you know, almost night after night, I would have dreams of being in the pulpit and preaching messages. And when I would read the Bible, I would, instead of just reading it and hearing stories or seeing life lessons, as I would read it, it would, in my mind, in my heart, it would fall out into an outline for a sermon, just absolutely immediately after getting saved.
Amazing. And did you at the time have faith in God?
Oh, yes. I was raised without there being any doubt that God was not only existed but was in our lives. That's how I was raised. There was never a question. I didn't even know that there was another way of looking at the world or looking at theology. All I knew growing up was that at some point in my life I had to dedicate my life to God, but I never questioned whether there was a God.
And were you raised by your father and mother?
You know, my dad got killed whenever I was 3 years old, and so I was raised by my mother and my stepdad, and had a huge influence on my life from my grandparents.
Were you close to your stepfather?
I was fairly close to my stepfather. Probably not as close as I would prefer to have been. We just had obviously different types of personalities, but he was a very good dad. You know, we all struggled in putting our lives together throughout my childhood and then throughout some of adulthood. But you know, he was definitely very supportive.
How about your mother? Were you close to her?
Oh yes, very very close. Still am today. I had a very very close family.
When you say that, you said that your grandparents had an influence on your life. Were your stepfather and mother a living example of what they were preaching to you?
My stepfather and my mother were not really that religious. They were there was different times that they were religious, but really that's the reason I refer back to my grandparents, because my grandparents were fantastic examples of their faith.
Oh, I
they
see.
actually set the bar for me in my life, and I still try to live by the examples that they showed me as I was growing up, of loving people and trying to be supportive of people.
So were you living with your stepfather and mother, or your grandfather and grandmother?
I was living with my mother and stepfather.
Oh, I see.
Now, and it kind of depends. There were different times that, that job situations would change, and, we would bounce back and forth from city to city every once in a while. So there were times that we had more time with my grandparents than at other times, but they were very much a very central figure in my life.
Were your stepfather and mother, you said that your grandparents were a living example of love. Were your stepfather and mother a living example of love?
For me, absolutely. Yeah, they were very, very supportive. They were extremely supportive.
And so you become a preacher, and
yes.
Did your life change in any manner while being a preacher? Did it change? Did it get better or worse as a result of believing in God?
Well, I was believing in God before I became a minister, so other than feeling like I was now more dedicated to God, I obviously didn't feel like I was dedicated to living for God before I joined the ministry or before I got saved. It really just kind of depends on what better looks like. We were, we were evangelists who were trying to minister. I don't know why, Jesse, but I immediately, from the very beginning of my ministry, my heart was drawn to small churches.
Yes.
I never did really try wholeheartedly to climb the ladder and, get into the bigger churches or the mega churches. And I was a human being like everybody else, and I wished that I could from time to time. But I remember telling my wife, finances are always going to be a problem because, my heart feels really drawn to the smaller churches.
Right.
And so financially things definitely, were never that wonderful. But it was a very... I felt like I had a very intimate relationship, with the Lord during those experiences. So, there were times that felt like life had gotten better.
What drew you to Jimmy Swaggart?
That's a great question. That's a wonderful question. Nobody's ever asked that before. Okay, so as I was growing up, even in my mom and stepdad's house, even though they weren't really that religious, I would prefer to say in some ways they were kind of superstitious and not necessarily religious.
Uh-huh.
We would watch Jimmy Swaggart on TV. Jimmy Swaggart's program would come.
Hold that thought. We'll pick up at this with this after this break. 888-77-53773.
Stand by me. Keep holding on, 'cause we'll make it through. Just stay strong, 'cause I'm here for you. There's nothing you can say.
Okay, welcome back. It's just so much stuff here, folks. I have some updates for you on the George Zimmerman's trial. Very interesting trial happening there. Also, just news items. Tea Party is under attack again, by the way. Some stats on that. And there's just so much going on. It's as though evil is ruling. It is absolutely amazing. But for now, I'm talking with ex-pastor Jerry DeWitt. He was a pastor for 25 years. Now he is an atheist. He has a brand new book, Hope After Faith, an ex-pastor's journey from belief to atheism. Amazing title, huh? Jerry, you were telling us what attracted you to Jimmy Swaggart.
Yes. Well, I had grown up watching the program, and then it just so happened that my fourth grade teacher, who was Assembly of God, and as I mentioned earlier, that was the other side of the theological Pentecostal fence from my family, she invited me to a youth camp, Swaggart Youth Camp, when I was around 16 years old. And, I loved her so much, and she had been so supportive of me and had been such a fantastic example of unconditional love that even though at that age, as a teenager, I wasn't overly excited about attending a camp meeting, I couldn't tell her no. And so whenever I got there, it was obviously a life-changing experience.
Yeah. What happened as a pastor? What happened to you? If there's one thing specific that happened to you to cause you to turn away from faith to atheism, what happened?
I almost wish that there was one particular thing, because it would obviously make interviews easier. How do you, besides writing a book and writing a memoir and telling your story throughout 270-something pages,
right?
How do you describe your life and the inner turmoil or the inner dialogue, that goes on over the course of 25 years? But I've tried to condense it down, into a few steps and a few key events. Quite honestly, Jesse, in the very beginning, whenever it became my responsibility to preach the doctrine of hell and eternal punishment, it honestly, it seemed so out of, first off, it seemed out of character of the holy and loving God that I had been introduced to and had been taught. And then it also seemed to not be equitable for someone to, even if they lived a very, very sinful life for 100 years, for the economy of sin to pay off a balance by saying you now will be punished for not just 100 years or 100,000 years or 100 million, but 100 billion plus years, plus eternity, and that really started me investigating not just the Pentecostal doctrine that I was brought up in, but it made me investigate the Bible itself. And so, when people are looking for one simple catalyst, that's the earliest moment that I can give, simplest moment. And then from there, it led from one subject to the next over the course of 25 years. And I'll be honest with you, I came out of Christianity and Christian ministry kicking and screaming. It was the last thing that I ever envisioned myself doing, and it was the last thing that I wanted to do.
So you started to change, your faith in God started to change once you realized that if you were a sinner, you could suffer the rest of your life?
That you could suffer in hell for eternity. And I wouldn't say that my faith in God, I would say if it was about faith or confidence in anything, it really would have been more in the doctrine that I had been taught, because I still very much felt as if I had a relationship with God for another 25 years. I don't think it affected that.
When you were a minister and growing up with faith in God, were you still sinning?
Was I still sinning when I was a minister?
Yes.
Sure. I'm sure that there were things that theology some people's theologies would have considered sins. Sure.
And I mean, but how about you? Now that you look back on it, were you sinning?
No, now I don't think that there is a such thing as sin from the biblical perspective.
Oh, because you're an atheist now, but let me say at the time, at the time you were sinning, and were you frustrated at the fact that you were a child of God, a minister, and still sinning?
That's a very interesting question. Let me think about that for about 2 seconds, so I can try to give you an honest answer with that. Sure. In Pentecostalism, at least the branch of Pentecostalism that I was in at the time, there was a very, very high standard, a very high level of expectation, and part of the Pentecostal theology is unfortunately a guilt cycle that mandates consistent repentance because of sin. Simple things. It doesn't have to be sin on the level of committing adultery.
Right.
It can be very, very simple things. And so, yes, in the very beginning that was true, but over time and somewhat very quickly, my theology, I would call it, grew out of that, and I began to be a very strong believer in the complete and total substitutionary sacrifice of Jesus Christ, that he was the complete substitute and sacrifice for our sins. And so over time, that became less of a frustration. And I think I really did live a pretty good and clean life.
Oh, okay. I read that in May of 2011, you received a call from a parishioner who was frantic because her brother had been in a bad motorcycle accident, and his life was in danger. And you said that you did the best to comfort her, but couldn't bring yourself to call on God's help.
Right.
And this was the night that you realized you no longer believed in God. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's an important part. And you're a minister, so you understand. You've probably lived, I would imagine, I'm correct in saying you've probably lived through those phone calls many, many, many times. Would that be correct?
Yes.
You know what that moment's like. My heart was racing, and my mind was racing as well. And I wish that I could explain why it all fell together right at that exact moment, but obviously I can't. Life's very complicated. But here was my concern, Jesse. This young lady was like a daughter to me. She was so dear to our family, and when she began to describe how damaged, how injured her brother was, it really seemed very iffy as to whether or not he would even survive, much less come out of it whole. And my concern was, and I couldn't formulate this at the time as well as I think I can now, but my concern was that if I led her in prayer, and then her brother did not survive or did not come out of the situation, well, then it would cause her to doubt in the ways that I had been struggling with for, months to years prior. And I did not enjoy the doubting process. I avoided it in every way that I could. And so, quite honestly, I didn't want to put her in that position. And I felt like contributing that by praying with her, I could be contributing to inner turmoil and doubt if her brother didn't survive.
That's amazing. Let me take a quick break. At the bottom of the hour break here, 888-77-JESSE. Very, very, very interesting. Jerry DeWitt is with me. Back in a moment.
Hard to be good to me. And I don't understand. What's your plan? But you can't be good to me. Why can't you be good to me?
We're here 3 hours a day, Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific time, 9 to noon Eastern time. heard around the world by everybody and their mama. I do appreciate it. I want to ask that you pray for the 19 firefighters who were killed in Arizona over the weekend trying to put out a forest fire there. Lightning struck, a fire started, and 19 men were killed, firefighters. Isn't that amazing? Young guys, healthy guys. Healthy guys. And so pray for that their souls rest in peace and that their families, I just don't know how, that's rough. We have not had anything like this since the 9/11 attack, terrorist attack. 19 firefighters killed in a fire there in Arizona. Talking with ex-preacher Jerry DeWitt. He is now an atheist, and he has a brand new book, Hope After Faith, an ex-pastor's journey from belief to atheism. We're going to tell you how to get his book in a minute here. Jerry, let me just ask, so this friend of yours, her brother was in a motorcycle accident. She called on you to pray for her, but you could not pray for her, right? So what did you say? I can't pray for you?
No, actually, I was horrified. Whenever, and as I asked and you confirmed earlier, you've received numerous calls like this yourself.
Right.
When I received the call, I ran downstairs and went to the guest bathroom so as to not wake my wife up over the conversation. And I had no idea when I took the call that I was not going to be able to pray for her. It never even crossed my mind. It was only as she began to describe the situation that it began to dawn on me that I was not going to be able to do that. That if I were to do it, that honestly it would be. I felt like it would be telling a lie, and I felt like it would be possibly setting her up for failure. And I had such a love for truth and for trying to be true and be honest and be a person of character that obviously it was a horrible struggle. So maybe not being as much of a person of character as I wanted to be at that very moment, instead of being straightforward with her, because it would have been cruel. It would have been cruel to have added anything else to her at that moment. She was standing outside of a hospital. Her brother's in the emergency room. She's in tears, and to have laid my burden on her at that moment would have been cruel.
So coming from your bedroom, going from your bedroom downstairs to the bathroom, you had a change of heart during that time.
Well, I had a change of heart as she was telling me her story. Yeah, as she was telling me about her brother, it's not necessarily that I had a change of heart. It was that I realized what she was wanting and became very uncomfortable with the idea of doing that.
So you could not pray to God that his will be done for her brother?
No, I couldn't have, because... So
what did you tell her?
Yeah. So what I did was I attempted to comfort her the best that I could. She had already told me that they had flown, they brought in specialists. She told me about the different types of specialists and doctors who were on hand. And, I told her that her brother was very young, that he was very strong, and that was all in his favor. And apparently, my hope was that with them getting the specialist there in the timely manner that they did, that he would be okay.
But you never said to her, I can't pray for you, your brother.
No. That would have been a shock to her, and that would have been cruel.
How does her brother? Did her brother survive?
He did survive, and he came out, disabled through the process.
Right.
But fortunately, he did survive, and I'm very happy for her and her family that he did. Still, even though it's been so long, there's still a long road of recovery for him. But
and so, before you left the bathroom, you were done with God. Did you go upstairs to tell your wife, honey, I do not believe in God anymore?
No, it was all still so incredibly fresh, and to be completely clear, there was a level of awareness for me that I no longer believed in God. The real tragedy for me at that moment was understanding that I was no longer going to be able to be in the ministry. You know, I felt like that if I couldn't pray for someone who was like my own child, then I wouldn't be praying or ministering for anyone, because I cannot. You know this, Jesse. You know from being a minister how intimately you love the members of your religious community,
right.
and I felt like this was, for lack of better words, I felt like this disbelief was my cross to bear, and that I could keep it to myself and just painfully deal with it and try to find a way to continue to minister to the people that I love so much.
And so now you are an atheist. Does that mean that you don't believe that there is a God?
Here's what I like to say, if you can humor me. This is what I like to say. I like to say that agnosticism is my conclusion. After 25 years of being in the ministry, after 25 years of study and experience, I know there's a lot of things I don't know, and I don't know if anybody can know. So agnosticism is my conclusion. Atheism is simply my opinion. It's an opinion that is open for change.
And so, that opinion is you do not believe that there is a God.
Yes, I do not see any true evidence that there is a supernatural realm. Yes.
But is there a part of you that believes that there might be one?
Well, I think the agnostic side of me is completely open to, there's a lot of things obviously we've yet to understand within nature itself. And, though I don't see any evidence for anything supernatural, I'm not going to push against it.
I know, but it seems so complicated to have two sides going on. There might be one, but I don't believe there is. Either you believe that there is one, or you don't believe that there is one.
Yeah, I don't believe that there is one, but I try to my character. I try to be very. I try to hold the truth, and I try to hold the things that I see to be true. I think that's part of being a good person, being a moral person. And so I'm not going to ever say that I know everything, because I know that I don't.
What is it like living as an atheist now, coming from growing up believing in God and believing that there is a God, to not believing at all? What is it like living that way?
That's a good question. Well, to be honest with you, ever since, about the time that all of this really congealed in my mind, shortly after that, I got in trouble with my community as word got out that I was no longer believing. So for me, the last 2 years have been pretty difficult. They haven't been internally difficult because I'm congruent with my lack of belief. But life has been a real struggle. I had pulled away from pastoring because I felt like that was the ethical thing to do at that time in my life as I was wrestling with these issues.
Let me take one final break. We'll come back and tell the folks how to get your book as well. Back in a moment. Okay, folks, I'm going to get to your calls here in just a minute. I just want to lay out a few other questions for Jerry DeWitt, ex-pastor who is now an atheist, and we'll get to your calls. Jerry, let me ask, now that you do not believe in God, and do you have less internal conflict?
Less internal conflict. I guess it's fair to say that from one perspective, because I'm no longer trying to cipher through what I felt like was very convoluted doctrines or contradictory doctrines.
Yes.
So yeah, that's probably true in one way, but at the same time, I actually feel a higher sense of responsibility of being a good person. So I think in some ways I I still have a very critical eye on my behavior and
I know,
what
but
I think.
at least now you don't feel that you have to live up to what you've been taught about God, and so.
Yes and no. I obviously don't feel like I have to be in church on Sunday, but I still very much feel like I should be, for lack of better terminologies, the Christ-like person that my grandparents were to me.
But how are you going to be that when you don't believe in Christ?
Well, obviously, there's a huge disconnect between even the Christ of the Bible, the Christ of some people's teachings, and the Christ, whenever we refer to this example of being Christ-like, what we're really meaning is being a very loving and accepting, human being. So that's just a terminology that we've developed in our society. We all know what it means when we say it.
Yeah.
And,
Do you have love?
Do I have love?
Yes.
Absolutely I do.
And only God is love, and we can only love others in the manner that he's loving through us. Since you don't believe that there is a God anymore, well, you're not sure, but you don't believe it, where are you getting the love that you're giving to others?
Well, I think that's kind of that's kind of putting the cart before the horse. The idea that God is love is a religious idea. And you have to start from that perspective to then say you obviously can't have love if you don't have God. If you don't start from a religious perspective, then you can see that love is part of the human condition. And it's something that we, over time, have evolved to have and appreciate. And
but
so
most human beings don't have love. Most human beings don't have love for one another.
Do you think most don't?
Yes.
Do you? Well,
you
that's
can
sad
see
if
it.
that's true.
You can see it by way of the children and the way the country is going. A lot of these kids came from Christian homes, and because there was not a true God's love, they had the best kind of love that they can have, and they thought it was from God, but it wasn't. And as a result, when their kids left home, they turned away from their families.
How does it look different whenever it's a true God love? What would be a good example of that?
It's a love without judgment. It's a love without resentment. It is love without without judgment. You're able to be honest with people and not resent them. You're able to see what's wrong, but not judge them for it because you know that of themselves they can't help it.
Yeah, I think I experienced that, Jesse. I mean, I'm sure that, probably people would disagree with me in different ways, but I think I experienced that. I think I have that now. I'm a human being, so it may fluctuate depending on, a lot of different situations, but I feel like I experienced that kind of love. I feel like I've received that kind of love even from fellow atheists, and I feel like I give that kind of love, but, humans are complicated.
Let me just let people know what you've gone through, and then I got to get into some calls. You're so interested in I'm running out of time here. After you let go of your faith in God, you joined an online network for clergy members who no longer believed in God. You're now a part of a dozen of people in a program called Recovering from Religion. Your grandmother outed you when she saw your Facebook page, and that's how the rest of the folks found out that you had turned away from God, no longer a pastor. So your wife left you. You lost your job. You became an outcast in your town, and so you've gone through a lot.
Yeah, and real quick, just to clarify a couple of things, it was my grandmother's first cousin, a lady that I grew up calling Aunt Grace, that actually outed me.
Okay.
My grandmother's still a very, very precious person in my life, though of course she's very disturbed over the things that are going on because she's a very strong Pentecostal believer. But yes, you're right. And I'm no longer the executive director of Recovering from Religion. I'm on the board of Foundation Beyond Belief. But you're also correct that yes, the Clergy Project is a safety net for people who find themselves in situations like me. It's a very it's a very compassionate program because people like myself understand how tormenting it is to be in that situation, and we want to be there for others.
What do you guys talk about in short? What do you talk about in these meetings? Do you say, "Oh, there is no God"? Yeah, you're right. There is no God.
No,
I'm so tired of trying to prove there's a God. I could never live up to that. I was so frustrated.
No, you're talking about Clergy Project in particular. It's all online. We don't get to meet because we have almost 500 members in the Clergy Project, and over 100 of those are still in the pulpit trying to find new careers, trying to find ways out. And really it's more of because it's all online, it's really more of just an emotional support group, because these are people who, let me give you one quick example. We have a man, one of the very first ones, who entered the Clergy Project, that his wife is very, very, very ill. They're dependent upon the hospitalization that he has through the church that he works for. And if he were to just stand up and say, "I'm no longer a believer, I'm getting out of here," it would almost be a death sentence for his wife, because he doesn't have any other skills to go and get a job that would give him hospitalization for his wife. So he's in torment. He's in torment. So we just try to be there to encourage one another.
Wow.
I'm sorry, I'm rambling on.
No. It's just a story. This has been so enlightening that I can hardly believe it.
Well, I've enjoyed I'll be honest, I think I've enjoyed your interview more than I've enjoyed any thus far. And I hate to say that out loud because I'll be in trouble with so many people, but thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Hold for me. Back in a moment. We have another hour to go after this. You know, I was thinking of Jerry DeWitt this morning in prayer. And as I read about Jerry, I realized, because I deal with so many people, the primary problem with most folks, the reason they turn away from God, is that they're frustrated and conflicted within themselves because they have such judgment on their lives and everything they do. They feel like they are not successfully living up to what God wants us to live up to, and they are just frustrated, and that becomes so aggravating that most people just say, "Forget it, I can't do it." And what I realize is that if the people, we can just let go of trying to live up to it, just let go and of the imagination. If you want to be free of your frustration, you got to let go of all your thoughts. It's your worst enemy. And that's why they're so busy talking to you, to prevent you from being quiet within and knowing God. And so when you do something wrong, they judge you, your thoughts, your imagination. When you do good, they judge you and make you feel good. And you're up and down in thoughts. That's why God said, so is a man thinking, so as he is. You got to overcome the imagination. Then the frustration will be over, and then you can know God. You got to do nothing. Then life will get better for you. As long as you're living in your imagination, believing the lies of your thoughts, which is not of God and is not of you, you're going to be frustrated. You won't know God. You know about him, but you won't know him. Jerry, tell the folks how to get your book.
Sure, and you'll be surprised how much I appreciate the message you just gave, and you'd be surprised how grace-oriented I became at the end of my ministry, and how many messages I've preached just like you just said. So that was heartwarming to hear you to recite that.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that.
hopeafterfaith.com.
And that's the website, hopeafterfaith.com.
Yes, sir. HopeAfterFaith.com is the easiest way to find out about us, and from there you can even purchase the book online from numerous sources.